The flowers arrived at 6 in the morning, 200 white roses in 12 arrangements. And Clara Bennett carried them through the servants' entrance of Whitmore Hall alone, because that was her job and she had always done her job, without complaint. It was the morning of the wedding. She set the first arrangement on the hall table and stood back to check the balance of it, the way she always checked everything, quietly, without being asked, with the particular care of a woman who had learned that the details no one notices are the ones that hold everything together. The roses were perfect. The hall smelled like something just beginning. Outside, through the tall windows, the grounds of Whitmore Hall were being prepared. White chairs in long rows, a canopy of silk, gardeners pressing the last of the morning dew from the grass with soft cloths. Clara went back for the second arrangement. She did not think about what was inside her coat pocket. She thought about the roses. She would think about the pocket later, when she had no choice. James Whitmore stood at the top of the staircase in his suit and looked at what he had built without knowing he was looking at it. That was the thing about James. He moved through his own life the way a man moves through a room he has furnished so many times. He no longer sees it. The hall had been in his family for 3 generations. The grounds had been restored twice, both times on his initiative. The wedding had been planned for 14 months. He was 44 years old and had never in 44 years been wrong about a person he had chosen to trust. He looked down at Clara, who was lifting the second arrangement into place, her dark coat still on, her movements precise and unhurried. "Good morning," he said. She looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." He had learned in the 11 months she had worked for him that she answered exactly what was asked and nothing more. He had found this quality restful at first, then admirable, then, at some point he could not precisely locate, quietly extraordinary. She was not cold. She was the opposite of cold. She was the kind of warmth that does not announce itself, the kind you only discover when you have been standing near it long enough. He did not think about this now. He had a wedding in 6 hours. He went back to his room. James Whitmore had built his fortune the way men of a certain disposition build things, steadily, without drama, with a preference for quality over speed that irritated people who moved faster than he did and ultimately vindicated him in every case that mattered. The Whitmore Group held commercial and residential properties across 4 counties. He sat on 2 charitable boards and chaired a third. He was known, in the circles that noticed these things, as a man whose handshake was a contract and whose contracts were kept. His fatal flaw, the crack in the marble, invisibly until the right pressure was applied, was that he trusted slowly and then completely. And once he had decided a person was worthy of his trust, he became constitutionally unable to see them clearly. This was not stupidity. It was the particular blindness that comes from a life in which judgment has almost always been rewarded, and so the habit of trusting one's own judgment becomes something very close to certainty. He had been certain about Serena for 14 months. The guests began arriving at noon. 160 people. The kind of crowd that comes to a Whitmore event knowing they are attending something, not just a wedding. But a statement about what the Whitmore name still meant in this city. Senators, industry heads, 2 members of the judiciary, a woman who wrote for 3 national newspapers and had come because she had known James's father and believed, as the father had, that some things are worth witnessing in person. Old friends in good suits. Younger colleagues who had driven 2 hours because declining an invitation to a Whitmore wedding was not the kind of decision a person made lightly. Serena Vale arrived at 12:30. She was the bride. She was also, though no one in that crowd yet knew it, the reason Clara Bennett had something in her coat pocket that she had been deciding for 3 days whether she was going to use. Serena was beautiful in the specific way of a woman who has studied beauty as a discipline, rather than received it as a gift. Precise, composed, the kind of face that photographs in any light because every angle has been understood and accounted for. She had met James at a charity gala 18 months ago. She had known, within 20 minutes of meeting him, exactly what she wanted from the encounter. This was not love, it was strategy. And Serena was an excellent strategist, and she had been very careful not to confuse the two. She had also been careful to ensure that James never confused them either, to keep just enough warmth in reserve that it felt authentic, just enough mystery that it felt earned. She was, in the way of all great performances, utterly convincing. She had also been very careful about the other thing. The other thing was the account. The account and the man who managed it. And the 8 months of quiet, methodical preparation that had taken place entirely outside the sight of the man who was going to marry her in 2 hours. Clara had found the photograph by accident, in the way that the most important things are always found, not by looking, but by being in the right place at the wrong moment. She had been cleaning the small study on the second floor, the one Serena had been using during her stays at the hall to manage the wedding arrangements, and a notebook had been left on the shelf. And when Clara lifted it to dust beneath it, a photograph slipped from between the pages and landed face up on the floor. She had looked at it for perhaps 4 seconds. The photograph showed Serena at a table with a man Clara did not recognize. A careful, deliberate distance maintained between them in the way of people who are accustomed to being seen in public. The table was not in a restaurant. The room had the look of a private office or a meeting room. Serena was holding a document. The man was holding a pen. Both of them were looking at something outside the frame with the focused attention of people who are doing something they have planned carefully. Clara had set the photograph on the desk face down and continued cleaning. She told herself it was not her business. She had learned the cost of making other people's business her own. Had learned it early, in the way that people learn things when the tuition is paid in something they cannot get back. She had her own children. She had her own rent. She had, for the last 2 years since her husband George had died at 51, on a warehouse floor in the east of the city, a very clear and specific understanding of how little margin existed between stability and the other thing, and she did not take risks with that margin. But she had gone back for the photograph that evening. She had stood in the study doorway for a long moment, and then she had walked to the desk, and she had taken it, and she had put it in her coat pocket and gone home. She had not known entirely why. She knew herself well enough to know that when she did something she did not fully understand, it was worth waiting to see what the understanding was. So she had waited. 3 days. She had taken out the photograph and looked at it each morning before the children woke, and she had thought about James Whitmore, who came down the stairs in the morning and said good morning to her and meant it, and who had, in 11 months, never spoken to her the way that some employers speak to the people who clean their houses, as though they are part of the furniture, present but not there. It had always been careful to see her. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. And then this morning had happened. At 5:30, before the roses arrived, Serena had come down to the kitchen in her dressing gown and made a call on the house landline, the old phone in the kitchen alcove, because she believed it could not be traced the way a mobile could. Clara had been in the laundry room, which shared a wall with the kitchen alcove, and the walls of Whitmore Hall were old and thick and excellent in almost every respect except that particular stretch of wall, which had been replastered 20 years ago with a material slightly less dense than what had been there before, a detail that appeared nowhere in any architectural record, and that mattered. Today, more than any renovation decision James Whitmore had ever made. She heard, "I'll be done with this by tonight." She heard, "The account is in the Cayman Trust, not the joint account. He'll never find it in the first 6 months." She heard a laugh, brief, low, entirely unlike any laugh Serena used when James was present. She heard, "Once we're married, he can't testify against me." Clara had stood in the laundry room with a sheet half folded in her hands, and she understood. With the complete and unwelcome clarity of a woman who has seen enough of life to recognize what she is looking at, exactly what she was hearing, she finished folding the sheet. She placed it on the stack. She went to her coat and pressed her hand flat against the pocket where the photograph was, and she stood there for a moment, and then she went to get the roses. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock. The officiant was a man of 70 with white hair and the manner of someone who has presided over enough weddings to know which ones will last and which ones are already carrying the weight of something wrong. He stood at the altar with the unhurried confidence of his profession and opened his book and spoke the words that had been spoken at 10,000 weddings before this one. And the words fell into the white shared silence of Whitmore Hall's great drawing room, and every person present felt, as people always feel at the beginning of a ceremony, that something real was about to happen. James stood at the altar and was composed and serious, in the way of a man who takes seriously the things he chooses. He had chosen this, he had believed in it. He had, in the way of a man who builds things to last, already begun constructing the future in his mind. The rooms they would change, the trips they would take, the particular quality of a life shared with someone you trust without reservation. He did not see Clara standing at the back of the room near the service door. It did not see her hand move to her coat pocket. The officiant reached the moment that is ceremonial in every wedding until, once in a great while, it is not. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, the room held its breath. It always holds its breath here. It is the one place in a wedding ceremony where the architecture of the occasion opens, just slightly to let the real world in. Clara Bennett said, "I do." Her voice was not loud. It was the same voice she used for everything. Low, direct. The voice of a woman who says what she means because she does not have the luxury of saying anything else. But the room was completely silent, and her voice moved through it, and there was not a person present who did not hear it. 160 people turned to look at her. She was already walking forward. She was aware of the sound of her own footsteps on the floor. Sensible shoes, the shoes of a woman who stands for many hours, and she was aware of the faces turning one by one as she passed. And she was aware of the photograph in her hand, and she was not afraid, which surprised her slightly. She had expected to be afraid. She was not. She was the thing on the other side of afraid, which has no clean name but feels like the moment after a very long decision has finally been made. Serena's face did not change immediately. That was the detail Clara noticed, walking down the center of that room. The face held for a full second before the control broke. 1 second. Serena Vale, who had managed every variable in this room for 14 months, was human enough to need 1 second. Then the control broke. James looked at the woman who cleaned his house walking toward his altar, and he felt the floor shift, and he did not yet know what was coming, only that something was, and that it was already too late to stop it. Clara reached the altar. She did not look at Serena. She looked at James, and she held out the photograph. "I'm sorry to do this here," she said, in that same quiet voice. "I have been trying to find another way for 3 days. There isn't one." It took the photograph. He looked at it. He was still for a moment that lasted several years. Then he looked at Serena. Serena looked at Clara, and what was in her face now had passed through shock and landed somewhere colder and more precise. And she said, "You have no idea what you've just done." Clara sighed. "I know exactly what I've done." "You'll be dismissed before this day is out," Serena said. Her voice was controlled again. The control reassembled with the speed of someone who has practiced it, who has considered this possibility. Perhaps in the way that people who are running a deception always carry in the back of their minds the shape of what exposure might look like. "You'll be out of this house within the hour, and I will make sure that you never work in any house in this county again. Do you understand me? You are nothing. You clean floors." The room was very still. Clara looked at her. She did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She said, "You can take the position. You are going to anyway." She paused, and what followed was quiet and complete and could not be argued with. "But you cannot take back what he now knows. And that's the only thing that ever mattered here." James said, "I'd like to speak with Clara privately." He used her name. He had not used it often. She was generally Mrs. Bennett in the formal register of the household. But he used it now, and it arrived in the room with a weight that was not lost on anyone present. Serena sighed his name once, in the tone of a woman recalibrating, reassessing, looking for the angle that still exists. "Please wait here," he said. And he walked through the service door, and Clara followed, and the door closed behind them. The corridor outside the kitchen smelled of coffee and roses and the clean, particular scent of a house prepared for guests. It was a narrow corridor. James stood with the photograph in his hand and looked at it for a long moment, then turned it face down on the side table. "How long have you had this?" he said. 3 days. "Why didn't you come to me before today?" She considered the question honestly. "Because I know what it costs to be the person who says the thing," she said. "I've been on the other side of it. I was trying to be certain enough that the cost was worth paying." "What made you certain?" "This morning, I heard a call she made from the house phone. I can tell you what I heard, but I think what's in that photograph is enough." He looked at the window at the end of the corridor. Outside, a gardener was standing very still near the floral arch, watching the hall. "The Cayman Trust," James said. She looked at him. "I heard it as well. I came down early. I was in the pantry." He stopped, His jaw was set in the way of a man who was holding something large inside a space that was not built for it. I told myself I had misheard. I told myself there was an explanation I was not aware of. He paused. I have been very good for a very long time at telling myself that. Is cited plainly, without self-pity, the way you state a fact about yourself that you are in the process of accepting rather than avoiding. There is a room full of people, he said, and a great deal to undo. I know. You'll lose your position. Whatever happens from here, the hall is going to be a different place after today. I can't make promises about the practical. I knew that before I walked in, she said. I knew it when I got up this morning. I looked at her. It was the look of a man seeing someone clearly for the first time after a period of looking without seeing. Not because she had changed, but because he had. What made you stay? He said. 11 months. You're a careful person. You don't take risks. What was it that... He stopped himself. I'm sorry. That's not a question for today. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my husband died 2 years ago. She had not planned to say it. It arrived without her permission, the way true things sometimes do when the distance between two people suddenly becomes something honest. He was 51. A warehouse accident. The safety equipment had been improperly maintained for 14 months. 3 internal reports were filed. None were acted on. He left work one Tuesday and he didn't come home. She looked at the wall for a moment. We had 2 children and a mortgage, and no savings because we had spent everything on his mother's care the year before. James sighed nothing. He was listening in the complete way. Someone at the firm told me afterward about the reports. They didn't have to tell me. It cost them their job. She looked at him directly. I know what it costs to say the thing. I know what it's worth when someone does. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere in the house, a clock marked the half hour. I'm sorry, James said. About your husband. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. He straightened his jacket. He picked up the photograph, looked at it one final time, and placed it in his pocket. Then he turned and walked back to the drawing room. He opened the door and stood in the entrance, and the room looked at him. All of it, the 160 people, the candles, the white roses. Serena at the altar with the composed expression of a woman still calculating. And he was quiet for a moment, which was not like him because he was usually a man of immediate and decisive speech. This moment of quiet was not hesitation. It was the pause of a man who understands the weight of what he is about to say and wants to carry it properly. I owe everyone in this room an apology for what I'm about to do, he said. I'm going to ask you to leave. I will be in touch with each of you personally. The wedding is canceled. He stopped. Not postponed, canceled. The word fell into the room like a stone into deep water. He did not look at Serena when he said it. He looked at the room, at the people he had known for 30 years and the people he had known for 3 months, at the candles and the roses and the silk canopy visible through the windows, and he gave them nothing except the fact of it. Clean and unornamented. Serena sighed. James, whatever she told you, please, he said, quietly, don't. She stopped. The room began slowly to empty. It was a specific kind of motion. People who want to leave quickly and understand that leaving quickly would be unkind, so they move at a pace that is neither. There were murmurs. There were hands touched to arms. There was the sound of 160 people being, in the main, better than a difficult situation required them to be. The woman who wrote for the newspapers was the last to leave. She paused at the door and looked at James and said simply, your father would have done exactly the same thing. Then she left. James stood alone in the room for a long time. The candles burned down another quarter-inch. The roses stood in their arrangements, indifferent and perfect. Outside the tall windows, the gardeners had begun, with the quiet efficiency of people who understand that their job is always to restore order, to disassemble the chairs. His solicitor arrived at 4. His financial advisor at 5. The conversations that needed to happen, happened. The Cayman account was exactly where Serena had said it would be. Opened 8 months ago, funded in increments, small enough and regular enough to move beneath the threshold of any single alert. Managed by a firm with offices in 3 jurisdictions and a very small number of scruples. It would take time to fully document. Less time than Serena had hoped. She left the hall at 3:15 with 2 cases and the expression of a woman who has lost a game she was certain she was winning. which is a particular and unforgiving kind of loss. She did not look at Clara on her way out. She looked at the door and through it, and she was gone. Clara was in the laundry room. She was always in the laundry room at 3:15 on a Saturday. Some things do not stop for events. James found her there an hour later. "My solicitor will need a statement," he said, from the doorway, "about what you heard this morning, if you're willing." "I'm willing," she said. He came into the room, which was small, and stood near the window. He had taken off his jacket. It looked like a man standing in the space where something large used to be, working out what the space was for now. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said. "About your husband, the warehouse." She set down what she was folding. "Which company?" he said. She told him. It was quiet. She watched something move across his face. Not calculation. Something older than that. Recognition. And behind it, something that looked like the specific discomfort of a man who is about to understand something about himself that he would prefer not to. "They were acquired," he said, 4 years ago, by a firm whose board I sit on." He stopped. "I know the current directors. I know the legal team." He looked at her. "The original negligence claim, was it properly settled?" "It was settled quickly," she said, "for less than it should have been because I had 2 children and no reserves, and the solicitor they provided me was not adequate for what the case required." It was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to have it reviewed," he said. "I have a lawyer. She handles exactly this. Notas a favor, as a proper legal review on the merits, with full access to the internal records I can request through the board." He paused. "If you're willing." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. It was a genuine question, not a suspicious one. She was a woman who had learned that understanding the reason is the only real protection against being wrong about the thing. "Because what happened to your husband should not have happened," he said. "And because you walked into a room full of people today, knowing what it would cost you, for the sake of something you believed was right. And because my father built this house on the principle that the people inside it deserve to be seen." He stopped. "I had stopped seeing. I'd like to correct that where I still can." The laundry room was quiet. Outside, the last van was pulling away from the drive. "All right," she said. The review took 4 months. The solicitor, a woman named Frances Alderton, who had the reputation of someone you did not want to be on the wrong side of, uncovered 3 internal safety reports that had been deliberately excluded from the original settlement proceedings. The revised settlement, negotiated without litigation because the board had no appetite for what litigation would surface, was 11 times the original figure. Frances Alderton sent the documents on a Tuesday with a single line. "Done. Well earned." Clara sat at her kitchen table with the papers in front of her for a long time. Lily was at school. Noah was at university. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 2 years. The particular quiet of a space that was built for more people than now occupy it. She thought about George, about his hands, which had been very large, about his laugh, which arrived slowly and then all at once, like a door opening. About the Tuesday, he went to work and she had been irritated with him that morning about something she could no longer remember, something small and domestic and utterly inconsequential. And that had been the last morning, and she had never been able to get back to it to say what she would have said instead. She thought, he would have found all of this completely absurd, in the best way. He would have sat across from her at this table and shaken his head and laughed that slow-arriving laugh and said something that made it smaller and warmer and more manageable, the way he always did. She called Lily first, then Noah. She told them carefully in the way she did everything. Lily cried. Noah didn't, but was quiet in the particular way that was his father's way, the way of a person who feels things all the way down and needs a moment before the surface can reflect it. At Whitmore Hall, in the corridor outside the drawing room, the corridor with the old plasterwork and the good light in the afternoons, a small framed photograph appeared on the wall, one morning between 2 older portraits. It had not been announced. It was simply there, at eye level, in a dark frame. It showed a man in his work clothes, broad and solid, caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame. Below it, a small card, plain text. It said, "In memory of George Bennett, for the people who hold things together." James had asked Clara's permission before placing it. She had said yes, And then she had stood in the corridor and looked at it for a long time without speaking, which Hay had come to understand was her way of saying the things that were too large for words to do properly. The Whitmore Staff Welfare Fund was registered in January, formally structured, independently administered, available to current and former employees of the Hall and all associated Whitmore properties for legal support, medical costs, and family emergencies. The first notification went to every person who had ever worked in the Hall in the last 20 years. A second letter went to 14 other estate owners across the county, because James Whitmore was, whatever else he was, a man who believed that things worth doing were worth doing at the size the problem actually was. Clara remained. The position had never formally ended, and she had never formally resigned, and neither of them had raised the subject. In the way that some things persist not because they are spoken, but because they are simply true, and true things do not require administration. She was still there in March when the snowdrops came up along the north wall of the garden, white, quiet, appearing without announcement in the way that things reappear after they have been underground long enough. If you have ever known what it costs to say the thing that needs to be said, not the easy thing, not the safe thing, but the one that changes the shape of the room and cannot be unsaid, and will follow you out the door regardless of whether anyone thanks you for it. If you have ever stood in a corridor before something difficult and done the arithmetic of it, what you stand to lose, what someone else stands to lose, what a silence costs, then you know something about what Clara Bennett carried into that drawing room. She was not remarkable. She would have told you so herself plainly, without false modesty. She was a woman who cleaned houses and raised children and paid rent and missed her husband on Tuesdays in the particular way that becomes, after a while, a permanent feature of the week rather than an acute wound. But she had learned, through loss, through the daily discipline of caring for things without recognition, through the specific education of a life that did not come with margins for error, that the right moment is almost never the convenient moment, that the cost of saying nothing is paid by someone, always, and the question is only ever whether that someone will be you or someone who has less left to spend. What she carried into that room, past the white roses and the silk canopy and the 160 people waiting for a ceremony to complete. No account could hold it, and no settlement could name it. It was the weight of a conscience that had done its arithmetic and decided. The weight of a woman who had been invisible long enough to know exactly what visibility costs, and who chose it anyway, for a man who had been careful to see her when no one required him to. George, she thought, on a Tuesday morning in March, with snowdrops along the wall and the house quiet, and the papers on the table and Lily's voice still warm in her ear from the night before, George would have understood exactly. He always did.